Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show. We have an amazing program in store for you today, as our very special guest is going to be Mike Huckabee, the newly nominated United States Ambassador to Israel. So excited about sharing our interview with him today. But here's the thing, we're going to be on a different set here at Andrew Womack Ministries than normal Truth and Liberty set. So now we're going to jump over to the set for Andrew's Classics and share with you the amazing interview with Mike Huckabee. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Truth and Liberty. I'm sitting here on the set of Andrew's Classics, one of the new shows on the Gospel Truth Network. I hope you're watching that program and enjoying it. But this is Truth and Liberty, and we have a really special show for you today. You're going to love this. Our guest today on Truth and Liberty is going to be Governor Mike Huckabee, the new ambassador designate to the nation of Israel. Donald Trump nominated him to be ambassador to Israel. As of the filming of our show, he's not yet been confirmed. I believe by the time our show airs that those hearings won't have taken place. But this is going to be an awesome time. So I hope you enjoy it. I want to just talk a little bit about that subject again of Israel. It is our relationship as a nation to Israel is one of the most important issues that we face. The conflict that Israel has been in from I want to say the moment they declared independence and as a nation, but it actually even goes back farther than that. They were fighting with the Muslims there in the region even before they declared statehood. But the conflict between the Arabs and the Jews, it's really between Muslims and Jews, has been going on ever since, and it's nonstop. It seems to be insoluble. No one knows what to do about it. The United States cannot avoid this issue, cannot not be a part of it. If we choose to take the path of the rest of the world and not be a part of trying to bring peace to the region or to stand up for the nation of Israel, then we're going to be, by default, siding with Muslims and terrorists and people that want to kill Israel and want to destroy the United States. So I want to share with you, just in a few minutes that I have with you here before I bring Governor Huckabee on, I want to share with you 3 reasons why America needs to support Israel. And the first reason is because supporting Israel is good for freedom. The second reason is supporting Israel is good for America. And the third reason is that supporting Israel honors God. Let's talk about the first one. Supporting Israel is good for freedom. So Israel has about 10 million people, I think, that live inside its borders. About 7 to 8 million Jews, ethnic Jews, and then the rest are mostly Arabs, some other nationalities, but Arab roots, ethnic roots. So about 10 million, maybe 11, could be 12, but right in there. They are surrounded, literally surrounded by nations that have between 250 to 350 million people. And every one of them is counted as an enemy. Every one of them hates Israel and views Israel, rejects Israel's right to exist, and believes that they should not be a nation. And yet Israel, this little tiny nation, you know, the landmass there, it's roughly the size of New Jersey. Okay, and when you look at it on a map, especially a map of the whole world and the whole region, you can see that this is just incredible that they even still exist as a country. So incredible that the Arabs cannot allow even this little sliver of land for the Jews to live on, right? It's like, what's the problem? It's so small, right? But it is the only representative democracy in the Middle East. I believe they have a parliamentary system, but they have representatives who are elected to parliament. Israel has a constitution. They have a court system. They have a rule of law. They have rights that are guaranteed to all citizens within their borders, Jews and non-Jews alike. They have due process. They are really and truly, when we say the only democracy in the region, it's true, except that a true democracy they're not. They're actually a representative democracy, or really a republic. But the point is that Israel has freedom and the rule of law and justice and equality. No other country in the area has it. So when we're supporting Israel, we're supporting freedom. Israel is by far the most prosperous nation in the entire Middle East. Israel is the last I checked, they're 13th in ranking on per capita GDP. That means of all the wealth that's produced by the nation, how much is what can be assigned to each individual in the nation. That's per capita. And Israel ranks 13th in the world. That's from a nation that is less than 100 years old. It's only 80 years old now. And that started with absolutely nothing in a desert, right? And yet they've turned it into one of the most prosperous nations in the world, producing technological innovations that we use in our lives here in America every day, medical innovations that are saving lives around the world. They're a breadbasket to the world. They export far more in terms of food and produce and fruits and vegetables than they consume. And they're surrounded by countries that are not free, are not constitutional republics, do not recognize rights, do not recognize due process, do not recognize equality, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. The nations that surround them are largely governed by Sharia. Sharia is Islamic law. Under Islamic law, there is no concept of freedom of speech or freedom of religion, unless you're a man and you are a devout Muslim accusing someone who's not a Muslim, right? Then you have all the rights in the world. Accusing your own wife of adultery, then you have all the rights in the world. Your wife doesn't have any rights, but you do. Women are basically property under Sharia. Children are absolutely property under Sharia. Savage treatment of your own children and wife goes unaddressed all the time in fundamentalist Muslim nations. And so when we support Israel, we are supporting a light, we are supporting freedom in the midst of tyranny, in the midst of darkness and oppression in the world. The second reason America should support Israel is because supporting Israel is good for America. The Bible says in Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, that God entered into a covenant with Abraham. He made a promise to Abraham when he called him out of the land of the land of the Chaldeans into the land of Canaan. He told Abram, he said, whoever blesses you, I will bless, and whoever curses you, I will curse. That promise to Abram, or Abraham as he later became, is still in effect today. And as we support and prosper and help Israel, we are blessing them, and God promises to bless us. Muslims, you see, not all Muslims, okay, let's get that out in the open, but Islam in general, and many, many millions of Muslims, see America as their sworn enemy. You see, they call Israel the little Satan and America the great Satan. And when we support Israel, we are supporting a powerful strategic ally positioned right in the middle of all these nations that want to destroy us. Okay? Israel is an important source of intelligence. Israel has the best intelligence in the world. It is amazing what they know and how accurately they know it. We're also supporting a nation with a strong, capable military, and so they are a deterrent to violence, a deterrent to aggression in the Middle East, and a deterrent to the rise of fundamentalist Islam. You remember during the presidency of Barack Obama, Obama was hostile to Israel. He was disrespectful to its prime minister. He considered Israel an occupier, and frankly, I think he thought of it as an illegitimate nation, although he never quite said so publicly. But Obama ushered in something they called at the time, you might remember this, the Arab Spring. And in this so-called Arab Spring, the Muslim nations around Israel all started experiencing uprising and turmoil. Fundamentalist factions inside of these Arab nations begin to take over the governments, like in Egypt, like in Libya, even in Lebanon, as the Iranian-backed forces grew, and Iran grew to have increased power in the region, even possibly greater than Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth. Yemen and other nations. This Arab Spring was really an uprising of fundamentalist Islam. So you can see how we treat and approach Israel has a direct relationship to how strong does fundamentalist Islam become in the world. Under Obama's presidency, ISIS came into power because he did nothing to stop it, and he didn't empower Israel to stop it. ISIS took over a large section of the region in Syria and Iraq, and I think they even went down into Jordan, but I can't promise that. Absolutely brutal terrorists. These guys wanted to reestablish the Islamic Caliphate from the time of Muhammad, right? From the 8th and 9th and 10th century. They went about destroying churches and synagogues, destroying Christian and Jewish homes, running Christians and Jews out of those nations in places where there had been Christian churches since the time of the apostles in Iraq, beheading, raping, imprisoning people without due process, without criminal charges, just because they're non-Muslims, requiring people to confess Islam at the point of a sword. So you see, when we support Israel, though, we're supporting a powerful deterrence against that fundamentalist Islamic movement that sees the United States as its mortal enemy. The third reason that we should support Israel is that supporting Israel honors God. I mentioned to you that God promised Abram that whoever blessed him would be blessed and whoever cursed him would be cursed. But he went on to say in verse 7 of Genesis chapter 12, "The Lord appeared to Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him." You need to know, guys, it's common in the church to believe in something called replacement theology. I believe replacement theology is false doctrine. It says that God is done with the Jewish people. It says that the church, the Christians now, are the new Israel. I think this is a short-sighted interpretation of the Bible. God is not done with the Jewish people. The thing is, guys, that the original covenant of Abraham is still in effect. It's never been replaced. In fact, the covenant that God cut with Abraham is the covenant that Jesus Christ fulfilled. And the interim covenant, the law of Moses with its ceremonial laws and that sort of thing, is the old covenant. But the original covenant with Abraham, Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 11 in verse 1 when he says, "I say then, hath God cast away his people? God forbid," he says. And then in verse, he goes on to say, "For I am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham of the tribe of Benjamin." Verse 2, "God hath not cast away his people which he foreknew. Wot ye not, or do you not know, what the scripture saith to Elijah?" It goes on to say. He's saying here, God has not cast away Israel. He goes on to talk about how Israel is, God's relationship to Israel is like an olive tree. And he's broken off natural branches after the resurrection, ascension of Jesus, and their rejection of Messiah. Not all Jews rejected Messiah. The apostles were Jews. The first 3,000 to 5,000 to 6,000 Christians were Jews, right? But natural branches were broken off, and wild branches, Paul talks about, were grafted into the olive tree. And so he says in verse 24, "For if thou wert cut out of the olive tree which is wild by nature, and wert grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these which be the natural branches be grafted into their own olive tree?" And in verse 25, he goes on further and says that he wants us to understand blindness in part, and he's referring to their rejection of Jesus, right? Unbelief. Blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in, And in verse 26, so all Israel shall be saved. The day is coming when the eyes of the Jewish people will be opened, and those eyes are already opening. There are tens of thousands of Messianic Jews in the land of Israel and many more around the world. God is doing a work in Israel today, and He's not going to finish that work, I don't think, until He returns. But let me remind you guys as a final point today, Jesus Christ Himself, when He comes, He's going to Israel. He is going to set His feet on the Mount of Olives. In Acts chapter 1, it says that the disciples watched as Jesus was taken up into heaven. And then the angels said to them in verse 10, while they looked steadfastly toward heaven, two men stood by them in white apparel, which also said, You men of Galilee, why stand you here gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus which is taken up from you into heaven shall so come in like manner as you have seen Him go into heaven. So Jesus is coming back, and He will rule the world from Israel, from Jerusalem. And he who blesses Israel will be blessed. And when we bless and support Israel, we honor God. All right, folks, my guest today is Mike Huckabee, former governor of the state of Arkansas, two-time presidential candidate, host of Huckabee on the TBN show, and an author of more than 14 books. He's received many different honors in his life. He's a Fox News contributor, and he's a strong believer in Jesus Christ, and he's the new ambassador designate to the nation of Israel, and it's our honor to have him as a guest now on Truth and Liberty. Are you passionate about standing for truth in the culture, but don't know how to get started? Well, Truth and Liberty, our mission is to educate, unify, and mobilize the body of Christ to stand for truth in the public square. And as part of our mission, we provide you with an amazing array of resources on our website. And our website has just been revamped, remodeled, and retooled to be user-friendly. And I'm so excited about it because I believe that there's nothing like it out there anywhere. I want to encourage you today to go to truthandliberty.net and check out the Resources Center and the Get Equipped Center. On our Resources Center, you will find hundreds of links, hundreds of videos, articles, blogs, even America's original founding documents can be found on Truth and Liberty's Resources Center. It's searchable by topic, preset topic, or you can put in a custom search to find exactly what you need and what you're interested in. In the Get Equipped section, we link you to tools created by our strategic partners, including Pray, Vote, and Engage tools. We culture impact teams, civic action teams, biblical citizenship in modern America, biblical worldview training, and more. So go today to truthandliberty.net and find what you need to get equipped to stand for truth in the public square. All right, folks, welcome back here on Truth and Liberty. And as I said, we are joined now by former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, former presidential candidate Mike Huckabee, and most excitedly now, ambassador designate to the nation of Israel. I'm not sure which of those titles to use for you right now, Governor, but thank you so much for joining us here on Truth and Liberty.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And as far as title, call me Mike. That'll be fine. I still answer to that. And sometimes I get called some stuff that you would never put on your program. So we won't use any of those words for sure.
Absolutely not. Well, it's so good to have you. I've been really looking forward to this talk for a while. Congratulations, sir, on your nomination to be ambassador to Israel. What an incredible honor that is. You know, I've heard you speak before, and you often mention Israel in your comments. You talk about how with your daughter Sarah and your other kids that you were very intentional about instilling in them an understanding of the Holocaust and the experience of the Jewish people and that sort of thing. Can you just share a little bit with our viewers, Mike, about kind of how did this appointment come to pass? How is it that this transpired in your life?
I think I was more surprised than anybody because I was, as I tell people, I was just taking care of all the things that I have going on, which is frankly a lot. People are surprised to find out I'm not retired. I'm busier than I've ever been in my life. And I was just finishing a staff call with all of the people that work on my TBN weekend television show. And a few minutes after that, I get a call, and I did not recognize the number. And I normally do not pick up a call if I don't recognize the number. But something, I know this sounds bizarre, but I just felt answer this call. Okay, so I picked it up, and it was Donald Trump.
Oh my goodness.
And I was a little surprised that he was calling, but yeah, I talked to him from time to time, but I figured he's busy with more things than just a chit chat with me. And he is a man that gets right to it, as people would probably understand. And he said, I want you to be ambassador to Israel. And people had, I know, told me they wished I would and they hoped that he would ask me, but I'd never had a conversation with him about this. I had not thrown my name in the hat. I had not lobbied for it, had not discussed it with him. So it really caught me off guard. But there's only one thing that he could have offered me that I would have said yes to. If he'd asked me to go and be secretary of something, I would have said, thank you. I'm honored, flattered, but I don't want to oil the machinery of somebody else's bureaucracy. That's just not my goal in life. I don't need the title. It's not something that I'm clamoring for. And I've had a wonderful experience in public service as governor. But this isn't necessary to validate who I am or what my life is about. But the one thing that he would have offered, could have offered, that it was very difficult to even say no to, was to be ambassador to Israel. So it's, for me, an Isaiah moment. Here am I, Lord, send me. And I feel very strongly that this is a God thing. I sense that from my perspective. Nobody else has to believe that. That's up to them and the Lord. If they don't believe in God, then they don't have to worry about it at all. But I don't think there are accidents in our lives. Things do happen that are intentional. I've been going to Israel since 1973. My first trip there was, I was a month away from my 18th birthday. I was 17 years old, just finished high school. And something happened on that trip that I never got over. If I could, I'll give you a little background on how this all came out, because I grew up very poor, didn't have enough money to go 50 miles from home. So the idea of going to Israel was unthinkable. But I'd become very close friends with the young man who ended up becoming my college roommate. He came from a very wealthy family. And when he graduated high school, he said to his parents he wanted to take a senior trip and he wanted to go to the Middle East. And his dad said, well, son, I'm not going to let you go over there by yourself. But his dad apparently thought I was a pretty good guy. And he said, but if Mike Huckabee will go with you, I'll pay his way. Wow. So that's how I got to go. And we went to the Middle East. We went to places that I couldn't go now. We went to Jordan. We went to Syria. We went to Lebanon. We went to Greece and all over the Middle East. Israel was one of those places. I loved many of the things that I saw at that time. Back in 1973, Lebanon was one of the most beautiful places on earth. And the city of Beirut was absolutely extraordinary. Its architecture, its culture, it was largely French speaking. This was before the Muslims came in and really destroyed so many of the antiquities and the beauty and the architecture. But there was something about Israel when I got there that, and I have to put this in context. In 1973, Israel was not a booming, spectacular nation.
Right.
It wasn't high-tech, innovative. They were struggling just to stay alive. And most of the people lived on kibbutzim because that was the only way that they could afford to take care of their families. They didn't have enough wherewithal to own homes and run businesses. So it was a very different Israel. But something about being there, and I view it as a spiritual thing, I felt at home in a place I had never been. That's the only way I can describe it. I felt it was like, I'm supposed to be here. This is a place that was magnetic to me. Now, I know that it was because I was walking in the steps of the prophets and the patriarchs, and ultimately in the steps of Jesus and the apostles. And so wherever your foot touches, you're not standing on one piece of history, but 30, 40 layers of history that have happened through all these millennium. But it was clearly, as I recognized, this is the land God has said, this is mine, and I'm going to put my people here. And he did 3,500 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, so that was the first time I'd been to Israel. In 1981, I started taking groups of people. And so I've taken tens of thousands of Americans and frankly, some people from other countries, for that matter, on trips to Israel to see it firsthand. I've never gotten tired of it. I've been probably at least 100 times to Israel over the 51 and a half years. In my wildest dreams, I never would have imagined that I would be sent by the President of the United States to be the U.S. ambassador to Israel. So if the Senate confirms me, and of course it's all dependent upon that, I don't necessarily get to go unless the Senate gives me an affirmation. I'd like to think that that will happen. It may be rocky at times, but if that happens, not only is this an extraordinary experience, but it's also the first time that an evangelical Christian has been named the ambassador to Israel.
Hmm.
So it's a significant thing. But President Trump realizes, as does Prime Minister Netanyahu, who, by the way, called me half an hour after this became public.
Hmm.
I've known him for over 30 years. We've been very good friends for a long, long time. I think he was relieved that he was going to have a friend,
I'm
somebody
sure.
that loved the country, loved the history, and but through all of these experiences, the one thing that has been very true in my heart has been that this is indeed uh, God's land.
Mm.
And so I will go with the utmost sense of awe and wonder, which I do every time I'm there. And every time I'm there and I'm getting on the plane to go home, what I'm sitting there thinking about is, when will I be back?
Mm.
When can I come back? And I've had people say, you've been here so many times. Don't you get tired of seeing some of the same things over and over? Because if I take a group, obviously there's many things that we see that I've seen 100 times. And I tell them, no, I don't, because I learn something different and new every time I'm there. I've never been able to exhaust all of the great riches, treasures, and histories of the country. So that's kind of a long, it's not a kind of a, it is a very long answer to a simple question, but it gives some context and background.
Yeah, it's actually very moving and beautiful, Mike. I really appreciate you going into that depth like that. Um, and we're in the time in history that we are in, and that you have the opportunity to be America's ambassador to Israel is really incredible, isn't it? I mean, Israel was attacked October 7th, 2023, in an absolutely heinous and barbaric invasion by Islamic terrorists, with more than 1,200 innocent people murdered in brutal ways that aren't even, some can't even be mentioned on the air, but beheading of babies and rapes and other things. And then we have 240 hostages taken. Some of them are Americans who are still held in captivity. And my first question for you about this is that President Biden, to this day, I mean, almost from the beginning, he gave Israel a little bit of leeway to respond, but almost from the beginning, even to this day, he's calling for a ceasefire. And to me, I'm wondering, what would we as Americans say if a similar attack had been waged on our soil? We went through 9/11 where we lost 3,500 Americans, and we invaded two different countries and occupied them for 15, 20 years. And yet he wants Israel to step back and not vanquish her enemies. What's your response to that? What's President Trump's mindset on that?
Well, I certainly can't speak for President Trump. I mean, that's a policy he'll have to make. And I can't even speak for the government now
True.
because I'm not confirmed as ambassador. So I want to make clear that what I'm saying is, I'm saying as private citizen Mike Huckabee, but longtime friend of Israel. I was there not long after October 7th. I've been there twice since that time. I've met hostage families. I've met survivors, many of them. Um, I've been to the Gaza border, been right there to the wall. I've been there when they were still shelling. I was in Tel Aviv having lunch with Yael Eckstein, who's the CEO of International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. And all of a sudden we had the alarms go off, the sirens. We had to go to the basement to the bomb shelter. As we were getting ready to leave, the Iron Dome intercepted a rocket right above our heads. So I've been there through all of these things. Here's what I don't understand. Why President Biden has put more pressure on Israel to give up their fight for survival than he has on the Iranian government that created this problem by funding Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis is something I do not understand. And I'll go further. We do have, even now, 7 American hostages. We don't know where they're being held. We don't know if they're alive. But how many times have we heard President Biden specifically talk about the American hostages, call them by name? Or have we heard him issue an ultimatum, whether it's to the leaders of Hamas itself, or to their Iranian funders, or to even the people in Qatar who have harbored many of the leaders of Hamas over this past year? I just can't get my arms around that. And why we have been so schizophrenic, and that's the word that I've used with this administration, because one day the president would come out and say very commendable things. We stand with Israel. They are our ally. We stand with them in an ironclad way. That would be the word that would be employed. And the very next day, there would be admonitions to the Israelis about how they should prosecute the war that they're fighting to save their very existence. It doesn't make sense. I do think this. I have every confidence that when Donald Trump is sworn in, our policies will be clear and they will be consistent. And they will also be favorable toward those who mirror freedom and liberty for their people and a true sense of a people that deserve to have a secure homeland.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned President Biden trying to tell Israel how to prosecute the war, so to speak. I don't recall any of our allies ever really trying to do that to us, Mike. And especially if they called for a ceasefire when we hadn't even gotten defeated the enemy yet, is that really an ally? I mean, that sounds more like an adversary to me.
Yeah, it's a very good point, because if your friends are standing by you, they may warn you if they think you're doing something horrifically wrong, but they don't do it publicly.
Right.
They don't try to humiliate you in front of your enemies. I mean, that's unthinkable. But that's what this administration has done by publicly telling Israel what their parameters should be to protect their people and get the hostages back. They've done something that I find untenable. They've essentially telegraphed to the most ruthless killers since the Holocaust that, yeah, we can be persuaded to push for an easing off against Hamas. Hamas can't be rehabilitated. They cannot be allowed to remain. Our own State Department has always labeled them a terrorist organization, not a government. So even though they govern Gaza, they've never been a government. They are a terror group. And what they did on October the 7th, and you mentioned that we can't say those things on this program, and we can't because they're so absolutely savage. It was not just murdering Jewish civilians. And let's be clear, they murdered Jewish civilians, many of them young, many old, infirm, babies, and the way they were murdered, but they were massacred. And it was carried out in order to inflict the most pain and the most humiliation that was humanly possible. Now, some people say, well, it didn't really happen that bad. Well, actually, we know that it did because the soldiers of Hamas videotaped their attacks. They put GoPro cameras on their heads. They videoed themselves doing these absolutely barbarian deeds, and then were bragging about them to their families and to the people back in Gaza. So that's how we know that this is not people exaggerating and embellishing the stories of the viciousness with which they killed the Jews. We have the film evidence. I've seen it, and it's gut-wrenching to watch.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all the more reason that you can never allow Hamas to exist and survive, especially right next door to the Jewish state.
There's so much that I'd like to cover with you, Mike. So I apologize if I'm bouncing around, but I want to touch on the idea. Some people claim, on leftists on college campuses, it seems like mostly, that Israel is guilty of genocide. And I want to read to you something from Ashley Church, who's a blogger in New Zealand, of all places, who's really got some great stuff out there on Israel. And I had him on the show a few weeks ago, but he wrote this: Israel has been described as the world's most moral army by British Colonel Richard Kemp, and goes above and beyond in its efforts to protect the lives of civilians. Typically, this includes giving Gaza civilians notice of its intention to target areas, dropping millions of leaflets, broadcasting radio messages, alerting Gazans through social media, sending texts and making tens of thousands of phone calls, and assisting those in need. What other army on the face of the planet warns its adversaries that it's coming into a specific location in order to minimize casualties? I mean, even America doesn't do that. Is Israel guilty of genocide?
Absolutely not. In fact, if anything, Israel has been operating at a level of compassion and concern. They're never going to get credit for it. And by the way, you quoted Richard Kemp. I know him very well. And back in the 2014 war that Israel had with Gaza, when Gaza initiated a similar attack, but nothing like as murderous or villainous, a lot of rockets, and they attempted to do horrible things and kill civilians. But my wife and I went over in the middle of that. And the reason we did was because President Obama ordered that no U.S. airlines could fly into Tel Aviv to fly into Israel. We thought that was absurd. Why would you punish Israel? Because they had been attacked. And it was very damaging to the Israeli economy at a time when they didn't need to be damaged. And quite frankly, Ben Gurion Airport in Israel is the safest airport in the world. Mm-hmm. It's unbelievably safe. So we went there on our own, at our own expense. And one of the things we did was to get a behind the scenes tour of Ben Gurion Airport to see what their measures were for securing. It was amazing. And it certainly solidified that there was no reason to prohibit American air carriers flying in. Then we went down to the southernmost air base of the Israelis for the Israeli Defense Force. We visited with the pilots, with the crew. They gave us a briefing in the briefing room, and they showed us in real time what they were doing to let the people in Gaza know, get out of this building because we're about to bomb it. And they did a procedure they call knock on the roof. And what they do, they first send messages to every cell phone. They send a text and a phone call in Arabic. Then they parachute in hundreds of thousands of leaflets. I mean, they announce everything they're going to do, and they say, this building, you need to get out of it. Their intelligence is good enough that they know about how many people are in that building, and they have drone cameras that are fixed on it. They count the number of people that come running out of that building, and only when the number of people equal the number they believe are supposed to be there, then do they order the pilots to go and strike and destroy the building, which houses rocket launchers and military equipment. I saw that with my own eyes, and I came back and I said, folks, the United States, we're a good country. We're a wonderful country. But as careful as our military tries to be to prevent collateral damage and the death of civilians, we don't get anywhere near the steps that the Israelis get to in order to protect the innocent. But when Hamas puts the civilians in front of their weaponry, and when they lie about where their weaponry is, there's going to be collateral damage. There are going to be civilian casualties. But it's not because Israel targeted them. It's because Hamas moved their civilian people right into the front of their weaponry. It's just vicious, and it's the mark of savagery. I saw, a political cartoon, and it showed the difference between Hamas and the Israelis. The Israelis had their soldiers in front of a baby carriage. Hamas had the baby carriage in front of their soldiers.
Yeah, yeah.
That's really the difference.
Well, now it seems, based on recent reporting, that the major theater of the war is now in the north, in Lebanon, as Israel's fighting Hezbollah. Now, can you just share a little bit about what is Hezbollah? Is it just like Hamas? It's Iranian-backed and that sort of thing. And where is Israel right now in terms of defeating Hezbollah?
Israel really has a bigger problem with Hezbollah in some ways because they have much more military capacity, many more missiles and rockets than Hamas ever did. They have a much broader space from which they can operate, and they have more money. So everything about Hezbollah is really a greater threat to Israel than even Hamas was because of the locality. Hamas pretty much limited to Gaza. Hezbollah has far more real estate that they control throughout Lebanon, and they have resources that are significant, all because the Iranians supply the money for it. And we can get into where did they get that money,
Yeah.
and why did they get it suddenly? Because they didn't have it when Donald Trump was president, and I can explain why.
Please feel free. Yeah.
Well, what happened when President Trump was in office his first term? He first of all withdrew us from the Iranian deal. That was a terrible idea that not only gave pallets of cash to the Iranians from the United States, but it basically gave them free rein to continue to develop their nuclear program. Now, anyone who believes that they're doing that for humanitarian purposes to supply electricity have to be smoking something that is illegal. No way are the Iranians developing any nuclear capacity because they want to supply electricity to their people. This is all about nuclear weaponry. And President Trump very wisely instituted what he called maximum pressure, where the United States put serious and very severe sanctions on the government of Iran. And it meant that you couldn't do business with Iran if you wanted to do business with the United States. Well, any country in the world, any company that had to choose between doing business with the United States or the Iranians, they're going to choose to do business with the United States because it's a bigger, more affluent market. You can't make enough money out of the Iranians to make it worth your while. So what happened, Donald Trump never bombed Iran. He bankrupted them. He put them in a position where they couldn't sell their oil. They couldn't sell any of their products. They couldn't export. They couldn't import. And they were on the verge of economic collapse. Had he been there a second four-year term, I think the Iranian people by now would have already risen up, overthrown the mullahs, and it would have been a free Iran once again, as it was until 1979 when the Ayatollah took over. That would have changed the whole world landscape. When Joe Biden came into office, on his very first day, he took his foot off the brake and put his foot on the gas and basically said, we remove those sanctions. Mm-hmm. You guys go and do what you want. And it didn't take many months before they were washed in billions of dollars of oil money, and they were selling oil to the Chinese and selling oil to other bad actors around the world. What did they do with that money? Did they build schools, universities, or parks? Nope. They supplied Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, who have then been attacking not only Israel, but keep in mind the Houthis have repeatedly fired at American ships. They have repeatedly sought to kill Americans. And our retaliation for that has been Joe Biden going to the cameras and saying, don't. And that really did it, didn't it? Because they listened to him say don't, and they didn't worry about it, didn't believe it, and weren't afraid of it. Mm-hmm. And they kept doing instead of don'ting. So that's why we are in the mess we're in, because the money that Hezbollah has been able to amass, same with Hamas and the Houthis, this is money that came directly from the Iranians. And it's a sad thing that we, instead of crushing them economically, now may be in a position someday where the only option is to crush them militarily.
Well, I might be a little off on my dates here, Mike, but isn't it true that just a few months before the October 7th attack on Israel, Joe Biden had funneled $6 billion to Iran in a hostage swap deal? Is did that money, do we know if that made it to the terrorist groups? It certainly maybe freed up other money that could go
Yeah.
to them.
I think that's the fair way to look at it. I can't say that the money was a direct transfer to terrorists, but every major amount of money that the Iranians get, they don't use it to help their people. They use it to kill Jews.
Yeah.
And look, I think we also have to be very careful to understand that they would kill as many Americans as they could. They've always said that Israel was the little Satan
Hmm.
and America was the great Satan.
Yeah.
Israel is the canary in the coal mine. What they do to Israel is what they want to do to us.
Yeah.
Their desire to annihilate Israel is step one of a two-step process. Step two is we're on the next list to be annihilated.
Well, I think it's important for people to really understand the importance of this issue to America. Maybe you don't care one bit about Israel or the Middle East or whatever, but if you care about America, you got to care about this issue because the entire region is dominated by Islam, and that religion, it's not just a religion, it's a religious political philosophy. They blend it into one military philosophy. They're committed, the fundamentalist Islams, to one world religious government called Islam. And you go back, 1,500 years or however long to 700, they're invading Europe. It's nothing has changed since Muhammad in that respect. Can you comment a little bit for us, Mike, about the strategic importance of Israel to the United States?
One of the ways that most Americans are not aware is that the sharing of intelligence is very critical to our survival. A lot of the technology that we take for granted here in the United States was developed by the Israelis. Defense capabilities. Most Americans have heard of the Iron Dome. They've seen how effective it is. They also have a system called David Sling that is effective against ballistic missiles. Their technology is what it is because it has to be. Whereas if somebody launched a ballistic attack against us, we probably have, an hour, 2 hours, maybe several hours before the target would be acquired and before the damage could be done. So we have plenty of time to react and to send up a missile or a rocket that would destroy the incoming. Israel has 15 seconds.
Mm.
They don't have the luxury of finding out that a ballistic missile is on the way and saying, we better call a meeting and discuss what we're going to do. They don't have that luxury. But there are so many things that the Israelis have created that we have benefited from. Let me give you some examples. People have had a heart stent. A lot of the cardiology that we enjoy in this country that has saved the lives of many family members of people watching us right now, thank the Israelis. The little camera that you swallow that goes into your body and lets the doctor see your insides, Israelis invented that. Robotic robotic prostate surgery that has saved the life of many a male in this country, created in Israel. I could go on and on, but this is a country that is a tiny little sliver, the size of New Jersey, but they have more Nobel science winners per capita than any country on earth. It's astounding what they have created, mostly because they had to. The cell phone, by the way, if a person enjoys their cell phone, the technology that is in every cell phone that makes it work was an Israeli innovation.
Yeah, and it's interesting if you look back at photographs of the region, the land, before Israel became a nation, or even a decade or two even after they were formed. It's desert, right? It's desolate. But you go to Israel now, and it's lush, green farmland,
Yes.
at least in the Jewish-controlled areas. Relatively clean, one of the safest places you could ever be, even though they're surrounded by their enemies. I mean, it really is amazing what they've accomplished, isn't it?
It truly is. And I'm glad you mentioned about what was desert and now that is lush, because it is. When I was there in 1973, it was still mostly desert. You go to Beersheba, for example, in 1973, and there was nothing to enjoy. It was dust and rock. Weren't farming anything. I tell people that one of the reasons that I believe God has his hand on Israel And one of the reasons that I support what the Jewish people have done in their own homeland, which was their homeland from 3,500 years ago, is because I'm witnessing the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Mm-hmm. The Old Testament says that the dry bones will live again. Ezekiel told us that. And we were told that the desert would bloom. Well, the dry bones are living and the desert is blooming. And Israel now is not only supplying enough fruits and vegetables for their own needs, they are exporting fruits and vegetables all over the world because they have mastered agricultural methods, and particularly methods in hydrology, the use of water, that have taken this desert, barren land and made it absolutely beyond fruitful. I'll tell you a quick story. I think your audience will appreciate it. There was an Israeli farmer who had bought a piece of land. It was out there in the Negev. It was nothing but just dirt and rock. It was horrible. Nothing growing there. And he bought that place and he worked it and worked it. And 5 years later, he was growing beautiful vegetables. His rabbi came out to see him and he said, "Oh, my son, what you and God have done with this once barren piece of property." And the farmer wiped the sweat off his brow and said, "Yeah, Rabbi, well, you should have seen it when God had it all by himself." A great reminder that, yes, God gave them the land, but he also tasked them with the responsibility of making those dry bones live and the desert bloom. So it's a funny story, but it's a true story, really, of how the Israelis have overcome the most formidable difficulties where there was not much water, and Israel, is pretty much really struggling for water. But they created the most effective desalination process. So now the entire Mediterranean is their water supply. They have an endless water supply because they overcame the obstacles with God's help and with an extraordinary level of ingenuity and innovation.
Well, Mike, there's so many places I want to go with you on this, but I'd like to, with the time we have left, to talk a little bit about the rise of anti-Semitism, especially in America, but in the West in general. But I never thought I would see the day that we would have riots in our streets and on our college campuses supporting terrorists and chanting, that from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. Do those students even know what they're really saying there? They're calling for the extermination of the Jewish people. How did we get here? And what do we need to do to fight against this tide of anti-Semitism and hatred that seems to have taken root?
Well, clearly they don't know what they're talking about. They have no idea. Because to say from the river to the sea basically means to destroy and annihilate the Jewish state and to wipe it off the face of the map, which is the stated goal of the radical Muslims. When I see the anti-Semitism that has risen up in the last couple of years, I'm stunned by it. I never thought I would see it either, because I kind of thought that after the Holocaust, maybe the world, at least the civilized part of the world, was done with that and realized how evil it was, because it was nothing short of just demonic. The only way I can understand this is to recognize that anti-Semitism is not a political point of view, and it's not based on politics, geography, sociology, ethnicity, race, or religion. Our battle is not earthly. This is a spiritual battle, and we're fighting a spiritual force of evil. People may not believe in Satan and demons. That's because they don't believe the Bible. But if you believe the Bible, you believe that there is such an entity as Satan and that demons exist. What we're seeing with anti-Semitism in this country is the rising up of hatred that, quite frankly, when you scratch your head and you say, where does this come from? Because it makes no sense. It's an irrational hatred. It's not like Jewish students did anything to the non-Jewish students on the campus. So why do they hate them so much? Well, they hate them because they hate God. And if you hate God, you hate anyone that he puts his hand and blessing on. Like it or not, God has put his hand and his blessing on the Jewish people. And so if you're Satan, not that you are, but if one is Satan, his goal is to destroy that which God loves. So that's why we're seeing it. And to try to explain it any other way will never make sense. The only explanation is the biblical explanation, and that is this is a demonic uprising against God and his people.
Well, and Mike, as we are winding down the show here now, you know, one of the biggest challenges we work on all the time at Truth and Liberty is to get pastors to engage, get churches to engage, pastors to teach on issues that are of concern, you know, moral issues, biblical issues that are in culture and this sort of thing. And I know you're so familiar with that. But I just want to ask you, you were a pastor before you got involved in politics, as I understand it. And how did you make that journey? That's been a long time ago now. But can you comment on that? And what message do you have for the church in America today about the importance of getting involved?
I would certainly not say every pastor needs to go run for office, but I wish a lot more pastors would. And not necessarily to run for president or governor, but run for school board, run for city council, run for county commission. Put a moral voice and a moral presence in the institutions of government. I hear far too many pastors say, I don't want to get involved. Well, you're already involved. When the teenage girls at your church are required to undress in front of a biological boy in the locker room, and you say, that's just terrible. Well, you're involved because your silence is what led that to be. If your kids that you take to church camp are told by the government that they have to have co-ed cabins for male and female, or that if they have a biological boy who believes he's a girl, they have to let him sleep in the same church camp cabin as the girls and shower with them. You say, well, that's ridiculous. That's where we're headed. Why did it happen? Because too many pastors were silent in their pulpit and didn't cry out for righteousness. So I'm just hoping that people will realize that, as I say it this way, everybody wants to eat from a clean plate. That means somebody's got to do dishes. And we need more people in the kitchen doing dishes.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's been just phenomenal having you with us today on Truth and Liberty, Governor Huckabee. And I just want to remind everybody about our free product giveaway today. It's Andrew's booklet called How to Stay Positive in a Negative World. And we're giving this away free to all folks who will go on our page at the Gospel Truth Network site. That's gtntv.com, Truth and Liberty page there, and share your email with us, and we'll send that to you in the mail for free. And I want to encourage everybody as well to be in prayer for Governor Huckabee and for all of Donald Trump's nominees in the United States Senate, for our country and the world as we're facing these amazing times. They're great peril, but great opportunity. So thanks again for watching Truth and Liberty. And Governor, thank you for joining us. God bless you, sir.
Thank you very much. An honor to be here.
All right, and we'll see all of you next time on Truth and Liberty.